Putting a story to music. Here's your look at the NECA toys The Armory Wars, Coheed, and Cambria. Two heroes from the past are made to do the unthinkable, be their enemy's greatest weapon. Before we get a closer look at Coheed and Cambria, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall the figures stand. I'd like to thank the folks over at NECA Toys that provide the sample of Coheed and Cambria that we're having a look at in this review. Starting first with Coheed, we're going to take it right to the very top of his head, stopping it right there. The figure stands 8.090 inches. I suppose we just could technically call it 8. We're going to switch that to centimeters, revealing that Coheed is 20.5 centimeters tall. Let's switch that back to inches. There we go. And we're going to do the exact same thing now for Cambria. Cambria obviously is going to be a little bit shorter than Coheed. I'm going to stop the tape measure right to the very top of her head here. There we go. According to the readouts, Cambria stands almost, well, she stands over 7.5, 7.6 inches. Switching that to centimeters. Again, the figure is close to being 20, 19.3 centimeters to be exact. Now, Coheed and Cambria were pulled from the pages of the Armory Wars, a side companion book series that went along with the Armory Wars albums, if anybody had had a chance to listen to those. In the book series, specifically the title Year of the Black Rainbow, I believe we're introduced to 3 iRobots. No, not iRobots, IRO bots. The 3 that were introduced and created were one called Jesse, aka Inferno, which actually isn't packed in this set. We only get the other 2. And then the other 2 were Coheed and Cambria. And they were basically built with superhuman strength and speed. They also had their own unique abilities, which we'll talk about right now. To come included with the figures, I kind of group these off specifically to the character. The first one we're going to have a look at is Coheed. Now, Coheed's abilities was that he was able to produce these spikes. Very similar, I suppose, to Wolverine on the sides of his arms. And he would be able to project these out, stick them out basically from the sides of his arms. They do that in the way that they've mimicked sort of these little clamped plastic pieces that are supposed to fit onto the side of Coheed's arms. And they do a pretty good job. They don't really necessarily go around the entire arm. They're basically just clamping to the sides, just like this. And just like this. I think they're actually supposed to go this way with the blades facing down, but I suppose if you wanted to, you could flip them around the other way as well. Now, these blades are a more slightly brittle plastic. Not brittle in the sense that you're going to break it by doing this, but certainly more susceptible, I think, to breaking than the rest of the figure. Like I said, they do a pretty good job of staying in place. Sometimes when you are bending the figure's arms, for example, I find that these do pop off. So just be careful about that. Let's go ahead and take those off. The other thing actually that's kind of neat about Coheed, we'll just move those to the side for the time being, is that he does have the ability to also construct this giant arm cannon that goes attached to his one arm here. Basically all you do in order to get this in place, let me just put the figure down here for a second. There we go. On the inside of the cannon, you'll actually see that there is an opening, and this will fit around his forearm. I suppose before we do that, I want to show you guys the detail work to the cannon itself. I really do like this. Actually, you know what? It reminds me of like the NECA, those NES, like the video game inspired characters where you had like the cell shading. It very much reminds me of that. I like the dark coloring that they did on the very end of it and then transitioned it to more like this blue-based gray right here. And of course, you got a little reflective light going on there as well. But the idea, it does look like he has handles, like he would be able to hold it on this one side, but really the idea is that this is supposed to fit on his forearm. I tried to do it with his hand in place, but it seems like it just doesn't fit properly. So what I will do instead is just remove the hand from the socket. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and just fit the cannon over place like that. I probably wouldn't decide to display, I think, Coheed with both the blades on those 2 arms. Well, obviously, you're not going to be able to do that anyways. Because on the one side, where the blades would be sticking out, the cannon clearly is taking up that bit of real estate. But I guess what you could always do is just take the other blade and just attach it to his other arm, just like that. Pretty neat looking, I have to say. Let's go ahead and just take that off for now. Remove this, and we'll go ahead and just put his hand back into place. Here we go. Now, with the Armory Wars, there's a whole series of these, but I think specifically these two characters are pulled more from the Year of the Black Rainbow, if memory serves me correctly. Getting a closer look at Coheed here, he basically looks like a very illustrated... Actually, you know what? He kind of reminds me of characters that you would see in original 90s comics. That's what I get very much the vibe when I'm looking at the character. And I say that actually in a real positive way. I like the work that they've done to the face, but again, it has a much more cartoon look to it and less really based in realism. He does have, of course, the longer beard, long hair in the back, and really kept very minimal when it comes to the paints. They didn't add any additional coloring on the hair, nor did they add it to his face either. When you look at his face, there's very little in the way of additional shadowing. They did do a really nice job, though, of outlining the color, outlining the areas of his eyes, and that panel lining, and adding a little bit of wrinkles there as well, in between his eyebrows and right above his eyebrows as well. Very nice looking figure. Of course, when it comes to the rest of his body, now basically both him and Cambria are going to be just using standard retro cloth bodies. Over top the retro cloth bodies is a very stretchy black material that velcros on the back, as you can see, and basically just attaches to the entire figure. So you would have to slide the figure into it and then close it up on the back there. It's got some armor here on the front. I did notice when I got this out of the packaging that the armor was slightly swayed to the side. I keep trying to bend it back, and I'm sure probably over the course of this review you'll see me just doing this every once in a while, just trying to bend that back into place. Again, the coloring is kept quite minimal here, really only relying on the dark gray plastic. There is a little bit of panel lining that they did to the front of the armor there. It's kind of really hard to see until you flip this up, but he also does have a little belt. Belt's pretty nicely painted too. The buckle done in a different color than the rest of it. I got little pockets there on the side. A nice little bit of wash added into there as well. But basically all the rest of it is just the black kind of jumpsuit that he's wearing. The unfortunate trade-off of this being a retro cloth figure is you can kind of see how the stretched fabric tucks its way into the creviced areas of his knees, of his legs there. So, of course, when you see it, it accents an area, I suppose, to his lower body. He does also have this little strap there that's on the side of his leg. While I am moving the figure, sometimes I find this does drop down. And if you're not careful, that could fall right off of his boots. So you want to make sure that this is as high up as you possibly can get it. Like that. Then, of course, he's got his boots further down there. Paint's pretty good. On the back here, they ended up using a flesh tone coloring for the hinge. And the resulting of that is when you do move the feet back and forth, you sort of can see a breakup of color. Where like his boots normally would be that dark black coloring. And now you see like a flesh coloring peg on the inside of it. It looks like they probably did start painting it, and I guess just from me taking this out of the packaging and just moving it around, I've actually flaked a little bit of the paint off, and I guess all of it was just really flaked off the back of it. Let's look at the articulation here on Coheed. Now, if you have collected any of the retro cloth figures, you pretty much know what to expect by now. The head rotates all the way around. The downside to rotating the head, and something you already am seeing happening here with this figure, is that it knocks his whole torso armor off. Thank goodness, really, it's only clamped to the one side here. Because of the length of his hair and the length of his beard, every little time you rotate it around, you can kind of already see what's happening. It just wants to push this off. I'm not worried on this one side, but I am worried on this side right here because it's looped around his arm. I suppose you probably could just slide this all off completely if you wanted to. Kind of even looks a little bit like the return of Superman with the longer beard and the longer hair. As for his arms hinge out at a 90-degree angle bend. A little more restricted by the fact that you've got this plastic coming down here, but at least it's softer plastic. You can move the arms forward and back. You can swivel up the bicep. Single hinged elbow. I thought there actually would have been a double hinge there. It also has swivel in the hand, whatever hand, of course, we're looking at. A little on the tighter side, but you can rotate it all the way around. You can hinge it back and forth as well. Then for his legs split out, drawing your attention. Trying not to draw your attention to the lower crotch area. He swivels at the top of the thigh. Single hinged knee. He has articulation basically because the boot is what seems a piece that's attached to the leg, but because when you're rotating it, you're basically just rotating the fabric of the costume along with it. And then of course he has the foot articulation, but I'm happy to see actually when it came to Coheed that they gave him the newer retro cloth bodies. In other words, you can hinge the ankles back and forth, so you can give him a little more interesting poses. And it doesn't also have, it doesn't have the difficulty that some of the older retro cloth figures had, where of course those ankles, they wouldn't be able to bend. They would be completely straight. And in some cases, yeah, you can get a completely leveled footing, so the figure would be falling over. I don't have that issue at all with Coheed. Next, we'll have a look at Cambria, and her ability is mind control. So, to come include with the figure, NECA packs with her these two energy constructs, which as a Canadian, I can't help but see that they look somewhat like mutated maple leaves. They're all done in a red translucent plastic, and unfortunately, they are the exact same mold to one another. You'll see how that could be a little problematic in a second, but the detailing on these is actually really good. You see, again, it's all translucent plastic. If you flip it around, though, now there's a difference between the front and the back. On the front, you'll see it's slightly a little bit more rounded. See that? How it's sticking up a little bit? If you flip it around to the other side, see it's a little bit more sunken in. This is the side that's going to attach to Cambria's fingers. And how she attaches to these is, you can almost see it. There it is right there. There's a little thumb hole right there. And there's 4 finger holes that, of course, her fingers are then going to sit inside of. Why I go back to the point I mentioned before about these being a bit of an issue because they're using the exact same mold is because they're using the exact same mold. The thumb is located in the same place as well. Thumb's over here. Thumb's over here. So, of course, when you are going to be putting it onto her hands, the thumbs aren't going to be in the same place on both hands. The thumb is going to be obviously on the opposite side. So one will hold it a little bit better than the other. Go ahead and take the first hand, for example. I'm going to line up the thumbs. Take the thumb, see right there? The thumb goes into that hole, and then you've got the 4 fingers attaching to the other side. And there's the one hand. On the other hand, literally on the other hand, if you see when you're lining up the holes, see how the thumb is on this side? The thumb's over here. Obviously, the thumb's over here. So, unfortunately, the thumb hole isn't really going to help you. Instead, what you're going to have to do is just take her fingers and sink them inside those holes. And just relying on those alone, she can't hold it. And that's a neat looking effect. Wish the mold could have been reversed, so at least it could have held a little bit better on this side than on this side. But at least she does hold it. And that looks pretty neat. Let's go ahead and take these mutated maple leaves and take them off for the time being. Getting a closer look at Cambria. A lot of her costume is very much similar to Coheed. You've got a spandex kind of a stretchy black costume. Basically, it goes from the top of her neck all the way down to the palms of her legs. Slightly different boots, granted, but really a lot of the same designs are coming here as well to this figure. She has this back strap area. The idea is it's supposed to fit around her shoulders and then meet itself along the back area here. But I find a lot of times when I am moving the figure, this just seems to want to droop down. It's not to a point, at least, where it can't go any further, because obviously the width of the arms are going to prevent this from falling all the way down the figure. But unfortunately, like I said, it just doesn't stay as well onto the torso. Before we talk a little bit more about that, can't, of course, overlook a pretty neat-looking head sculpt. Again, when I'm looking at this, I get the vibes of 90s comics. Very much I would have seen this kind of head sculpt somewhere on a comic page with a grimaced head sculpt right there. She has no eyeballs. Instead, she's got these glowing eyes, which I think actually in the story, the eyes are supposed to be green. I'm not 100% certain by that. But instead, they decided to go with pink. And sort of the idea of having these illuminating, they've kind of painted an area around her eyes in a slightly lighter pink. I think the detailing on the teeth is really nice as well. She's got long flowing hair, which we'll talk a little bit more about when it comes to the articulation, which can be a little bit more of a difficult issue again. She does rotate the head all the way around, at least unlike Coheed. But looking at the rest of her body, similar belt to Coheed, although with her, she has a lot more pockets going along on the back here. Not only have they gone and used the gray plastic, but it looks like they've also painted over top of it a slightly darker color. Now, that could have actually been reversed. They could use a darker plastic, could have painted a lighter coloring of gray over top of that. She does have this one little area on the side of her arm. It stays generally pretty good in place, unlike her leg. This just drops down a lot of times, similar to the issue that I had with Coheed. So we will want to make sure that you bring this up as far as you can. And sort of between the width of the thigh and the texturing of the material, it seems to do a good enough job of staying in place. But yeah, that will probably drop a couple of times while I'm moving the figure around. Speaking of moving the figure around, let's have a look at the articulation here on Cambria. So her head rotates back and forth, up and down. You can also rock it back and forth this way as well. I think that the body that they've used for this figure, being that they probably don't have a lot of female body retrocloth figures to pull from, probably would have been the same figure that they used for the Laurie Strode. Because, like, without going in there, she does have a lot of additional texturing here. And I think it's the same body that they used for the Laurie Strode. The arms hinge out. Again, a little bit difficult with those straps. They just don't want to stay well enough in the shoulder area. But at least you can get the arms to bend at a 90-degree angle bend. You can move the arms forward and back. She has a bend in the elbow, just a single bend. Hands rotate all the way around. And they also hinge back and forth. She does have, not a ball joint necessarily, but it just seems like a waist swivel. Legs split out to about there. You can bring the legs forward and back. She has a swivel on the top of the thigh. Single hinged knee. Again, you don't have any articulation in the boot, but sort of as you're rotating the boot, you can't help but just rotate the rest of the leg as well. And she does also have articulation in the bottom of the boot. Now, unfortunately, Coheed did have that ankle pivot. When it comes to Cambria, Cambria doesn't have that. It just does an ankle pivot. It's just a straight out pin that's going in on the one side and exiting out on the other. Neat looking figures. It's certainly one of those circumstances as well. If you're not really aware, you're not into reading, for example, the Armory Wars, I think they're just kind of fun pickups anyways. They're kind of throwbacks to what we would have gotten from the old 90s days of reading comics, where I feel very much like this is the characters I would have expected to see back in the pages. Now, again, we didn't get ourselves Inferno. Inferno wasn't packed along with this set. Instead of getting the 3 iRobots, not iRobots, iRobots, instead of getting the 3, we actually just ended up getting the 2, Coheed and Cambria. But I do think that these turned out really, really neat. Something different from your traditional retrocloth figures we usually see. In the final looks here of Coheed and Cambria, one correction this humble reviewer needs to make, because I don't know how many times I'm sure I said this wrong in the review. It's not Armory Wars. There's no R after the A. It's Amory Wars. Just in case some of you fans of the Amory Wars were typing frantically in the comments section. I don't know why this guy keeps calling them the Armory Wars. There's no R in there. Well, there's technically R there just before the Y, but there's no R after the A. It's Amory Wars. Despite my flub with the name of the title, the Amory Wars, Coheed, and Cambria are fun figures, even if you don't read the Amory Wars series. Now, in the series, I think we get 3 iRobots. We get Jesse, who is also called Inferno, and then of course we get Coheed and Cambria. In this set, we only actually got 2 of the 3 iRobots. Maybe down the road we may get ourselves the Inferno, but I really want to praise NECA Toys for even thinking outside of what a traditional release would be for retrocloth figures and giving us something a little bit different. Yes, the market may be a little bit smaller for those that are big fans of the Amory Wars and may want to pick up figures based on it. So I appreciate the fact that NECA Toys would have given us these figures, and it makes obviously more logical sense from producing these figures from scratch. The molds of producing both a Coheed and Cambria from scratch with brand new molds would be a little more expensive. Obviously, one of the reasons why they released these in retro figures instead. Looking at the 2 figures, I think they turned out really well. I mean, ultimately, one looks like Superman from The Return of Superman, and the other one kind of looks like Milla Jovovich. I don't know, I'm just kind of getting a little bit of that vibe. The sculpts on both of them are really good. Definitely a much more cartoon look and design to the characters. I do like the bright colors of her eyes. That pink really does resonate well on her head sculpt, even though it kind of looks a little bit like Milla Jovovich. They do come included with accessories. Coheed, the arm gauntlet blades, and of course his big giant cannon that attaches to his arm, which I think I also did put the wrong way when having a look at this review. I think the little stem pieces that are at the bottom that I was commenting and saying that they were handles actually go the opposite way. You can even see it here on the back of the packaging. The cannon arm should have been flipped the other way. Then, of course, when it comes to Cambria, she comes with those energy constructs that look like mutated maple leaves. Unfortunately, because they use the exact same mold for both of them, it means that one hand holds it a little bit better than the other. You can still get it in place, but you don't have as much that secure fit that the other hand benefits from having. Still fun releases. Again, even if you're not a big fan of Amory Wars, and maybe you've never even read Amory Wars, just fun-looking figures that you can put on the shelf. A big thank you to the folks over at NECA Toys that provided the sample of the Amory Wars, Coheed, and Cambria that we had a look at in this review. If you've read the Amory Wars, and again, I apologize for calling it Armory Wars. I hope I only said it once. I probably said it like 2 or 3 times. If you're a big fan of the Amory Wars, let me know down below in the comments section. Also, if you're new to this channel and you're enjoying all the content you're seeing, both things that you're familiar with and things maybe like this that you're not so familiar with. Thank you for watching these videos on a regular basis, and make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and yes, come back to this channel Monday to Friday, 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And yes, sometimes we even do videos on the weekend as well. There's always new content coming your way, so keep your peepers ever peeled to this channel. And thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.